How's it, my Orchids and Fynbos friends? This is Dave, and I'm back with another CareCollab video. If you are unsure what the CareCollab videos are about, or you would like to join in on the action, then please check the description below. They are run by Nina from Ninja Orchids. Essentially, members from around the globe join together to show you how they care for orchids in their environment. Today's CareCollab video is focused on orchid seedlings, and I'm going to show you some tips and tricks to take your orchid from this to this. I believe that there is one fundamental trick when considering care for seedling orchids, and I'm also going to tell you about 2 reasons why I think that orchid seedlings are an excellent addition to your collection. So the first seedling orchid that I ever received was this Dendrobium over here. This is a Dendrobium nobile type that I received in 2017. Twice a year I receive seedling orchids from Plantae. This was one of the orchids I received from Plantae. Then in 2018 I received this Cattleya Clarkii, which is a bicolor Labiata cross. This one actually started to spike this year, and then it unfortunately aborted. So it is very, very close to flowering size. I'm actually wondering if this new growth of year is not going to bloom this year. So pretty excited about this one. Moving on to 2019, I received this Cattleya type, which is a Laelia anceps by RLC Chief Pink cross. Then also in 2019, I received the beautiful Harryella retrocala, which I've done quite a few videos on. You can check those out. So as you can see, this one is in bud again and is about to bloom shortly. This one just blooms non-stop, to be honest. I love it. And the fragrance is absolutely amazing. It's a very lemony anise scent. This one I received as a seedling. Bloomed shortly afterwards though, so I kind of wonder whether it was a seedling. But yeah, it's a tiny little orchid. Then in 2020, my second polystachya. This is the Polystachya zuluensis. It's a South African orchid species. Then also in 2020, I received 7 orchid seedlings, which I purchased with the idea to try and specifically look at growing orchid seedlings. Obviously, I'd had quite a number of years now of experience with orchid seedlings, so I thought I would give it a try. So this section over here was all ordered in 2020. I bought it through a company called Orchidology. So I bought 3 species types, which are the Stanhopeia oculata, the Laelia autumnalis. Laelias tend to be pretty easy if there's something that you want to start with. This one I keep in a bit more of a drier mix, being a Laelia type. Doesn't need much of a mix, and then as you can see, a lot of new root growth there. Very happy. And the Dendrobium kingianum. In addition to the 3 seedlings, I also purchased 4 hybrids, which are the Pizziara Chain C Lovely by Gamesa crispa. This is a Oncidium type orchid. A Tolumnia Gyrac Firm crossed by Oncidium sotuanum. And then the Oncidium Coco crossed by Oncidium strictum. Look how plump those bulbs are. And a very happy, healthy new growth. Also, a very interesting cross that I received was the Epicattleya Rena Marquez crossed by Brassivola cucullata. So that is going to be a very interesting one to see what that orchid actually looks like. So let's briefly chat about how you go from this to my success story over here. Generally, you would think that seedlings are a lot more sensitive, but I've actually found them to be a little bit more hardier than the fully grown adult plants. I'm not talking about deflasking here, I'm just talking about purchasing seedling types from a nursery, for instance. If I look at my own personal success with growing orchids, I would say that about 90% of my seedling types pull through at the end of the day, so I generally find them to be a lot hardier or more robust. I also find that they adapt to their environment a lot more easier than an adult orchid, for instance. So I'm going to focus on 4 things: light, water, fertilizer, potting mix. As you can see, when it comes to potting up the orchid, you do not want to stick it in an extremely large pot. You want to try and have the orchid to be a little bit root bound, maybe a little bit of space around the roots so that it can grow nicely and have some space for another pseudobulb in the following year or two. But again, you do not want to pot it into a large pot, as the media will tend to stay wet in between waterings and may cause rot of the plant. You want to try and use a little bit more of a finer rather than a coarse mix when potting up seedlings. So you don't want to use large chunks of bark, for instance. You want to use smaller pieces if possible. Then you also don't want to subject them to extreme light. So for instance, if you have a Cattleya type that can withstand very high light, you're not going to subject it to the same light that you would do with your fully grown Cattleyas. When it comes to fertilizer, there are many different methods out there. I personally use the weekly method. As and when I water my plants, I give them a very low level of fertilizer. So I look at the requirements on the fertilizer package and I use the lowest recommended dosage. Obviously, there are different types of plants. You get dendrobiums, you get cattleyas, so you will need to still follow their normal regiment if they need a dry winter's rest and all of that type of stuff. But generally, when it comes to seedlings, I focus on weekly. Now, for the fundamental tip that I was talking about, I recommend that you make sure that you are watering your seedling types more frequently. If you consider a seedling type such as this one over here, this was the René Marquez cross. You can see it's in a very tiny pot, so the media tends to dry out a lot faster, so it won't stay as moist for as long. So you tend to have to water more frequently than you would the adult plants. They're also growing very rapidly, so will require more water as a resource. As with all orchids, make sure that you're not letting them stand in water or stay moist for an extended period of time, as that will still cause rot in the plants. Now, for the two reasons why I think seedlings are a good addition to your collection. Number one, you can get very interesting rare crosses, such as this René Marquez Brassavola cucullata cross. And generally, growers will do crosses, interesting and odd crosses sometimes is how people refer to them. But I find that you can find really interesting gems, and also the concept of not knowing what a flower will look like when it actually is going to bloom. So you could really end up finding an absolute treasure. So that's reason number one. The second reason that I like to add these seedlings to my collection is that sometimes you can get a lot more higher end orchids for cheaper. So for instance, you might find a collector's item which is in seedling form, and then obviously that will be a lot cheaper than the full adult plant. So that is the second reason why. And then bonus reason, they tend to be a lot more robust than the adult plants. Thanks for watching, guys.